I heard the gunshot before I saw the blood. It was supposed to be the greatest night of my life. A gala thrown in my honor. Velvet invitations embossed with gold leaf. Waiters in tuxedos threading through Boston's most exclusive art museum, serving flutes of Perrier Jouet and caviar on mother-of-pearl spoons. My name, Ethan Sorel, engraved on a brass plaque newly affixed to the museum's west wing. The culmination of 2 decades in architecture. Billion-dollar contracts. Cover features in Architectural Digest. And tonight, a private celebration of my firm's selection to design the Atlantic Performing Arts Center, Boston's answer to Lincoln Center. Everything was flawless. Until the sound rang out. The crowd froze mid-toast. Crystal clinked to the marble floor. My blood ran cold. Then came the scream, high-pitched and raw. Someone call an ambulance. The sound came from the courtyard. I moved instinctively, weaving through stunned guests in gowns and tailored suits, past a shocked cellist who still clutched her bow mid-performance. Out the French doors, into the garden where golden fairy lights twinkled in the night air. A woman lay on the cold stone path, slumped against a marble bench. Bethel Whitmore. My mother-in-law. Blood trickled down from her temple, mingling with her silver hair. A pistol clattered to the stone beside her. Her hands trembled, but she was alive. They can't know, she gasped, gripping my wrist with surprising strength. They can't know what we did. What I did. She looked me in the eyes and something unspoken passed between us. She didn't mean the press. She didn't mean the crowd. She meant me. And just like that, the night fractured. Not because of the blood or the gun or the whispers that would fill the society columns the next morning, but because of those 5 words. They can't know what I did. And I realized I didn't know my family at all. The morning after the gala, silence settled over the house like dust. Not the soft kind that gathers over time, but the heavy, choking kind, the aftermath of something that's just fallen apart. Bethel was still alive. She'd survived the gunshot wound. The bullet had grazed her temple enough to knock her unconscious and leave the courtyard looking like a crime scene, but not enough to end her life. The police ruled it a suicide attempt, pending psychiatric evaluation. The newspapers, of course, speculated. Grief, exhaustion, maybe even guilt. But guilt over what? No one could answer that. Not even my wife. Claire, my wife of 17 years, moved through the house like a ghost that morning. Impeccably dressed, not a strand of hair out of place, her expression frozen somewhere between pity and irritation. She never mentioned the gun. Never questioned why her mother had been whispering nonsense about what we did. Instead, she brewed coffee, coordinated with the PR team, and reviewed the press statement as if nothing unusual had happened. But I couldn't shake the words. They can't know what we did. That week clung to me. I found myself replaying every moment from the night before. The way Bethel had lingered in the conservatory, speaking in urgent tones to a woman I didn't recognize. The glances between them. The sudden disappearance just before the toast. And then I remembered something else, the file folder Bethel had clutched to her chest before the gun went off. It was gone by the time the medics arrived. No one seemed to notice, or no one wanted to mention it. But I saw it. Navy leather, gold corners, the kind she used for legal work back when she ran estate trusts for Boston's oldest families. Later that night, I walked into her study. I hadn't entered that room in years. Not since she moved in with us after Claire's father passed away. She'd kept it the same ever since, mahogany shelves, antique desk, drawers locked with tiny brass keys. But one drawer had been left open. Inside, loose papers. A medical form. A DNA report. No names. Just dates, numbers, codes. But I recognized the lab. Orion Diagnostics. One of the most elite private genetic labs in the country. Used by politicians, CEOs, and us. 12 years ago, Claire and I had done our own IVF treatments there. My breath caught. One of the reports was dated 2 months before our twins were born. But the sample ID, it wasn't mine. I knew my donor ID number from back then, familiar like a badge burned into memory after all the testing and paperwork. The one in the file didn't match. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe Bethel had been helping someone else. She worked with many families, after all. But then I found the second file. It was a printed email chain. The sender, Dr. Miriam Callow, head of Orion Diagnostics. The recipient, Bethel Whitmore. Subject line. Confidential, sample 3317 mislabeling urgent. Body text. We need to speak. If this gets out, it won't just affect the Sorrels. There are at least 6 other families who used sample 3317 during that period. We need to contain this before it escalates. Sample 3317. Not me. And yet used during our treatment window? My stomach turned. I sat in that room for what felt like hours, staring at documents that made no sense, documents that shouldn't exist. Then I opened the last folder. It was a photo. Claire in Paris. 15 years ago. Her arm linked with a man I didn't recognize. Handsome. Tall. European, maybe? His face half-turned, but enough to register his sharp jawline and cool confidence. The back of the photo was scribbled in Bethel's hand. J. Armand. Donor 3317. I didn't sleep that night. The house was quiet, eerily so. I sat in the kitchen, still in the shirt from the gala, staring at the photo of Claire and the man labeled Donor 3317. His name J. Armand meant nothing to me then. But the weight of the image, the intimacy of her smile, the casual way she clung to his arm in that Parisian street. It spoke volumes. Of familiarity. Of closeness. Maybe of something deeper. And suddenly all the pieces began shifting. Claire had spent a semester in Paris during her final year of college. I'd stayed behind in Boston to finish my graduate thesis. She sent postcards, grainy photos, the occasional call from some payphone that barely worked. I remember the way her voice would crackle over the line, her laugh warm and distant. But she never once mentioned him. I stared down at the lab report again. Sample 3317. Not mine, but apparently used in our IVF. It meant only one thing: our daughters weren't biologically mine. Cara and Elise. 16 years old. Talented. Brilliant. Musical prodigies. The pride of our lives. Cara with her quiet, haunted eyes and Elise with her wildfire spirit. I'd always assumed Cara got her melancholy from my side. My mother was a quiet, intense woman. Elise had Claire's quick tongue and sharp features, or so I believed. But now, I looked at them differently. I pulled up a recent photo on my phone. The twins at their spring recital. Both standing beside the grand piano, smiling for the camera. And now that I looked closely, I could see it. A certain tilt of the nose. The curve of their cheekbones. The faint olive tone of their skin in summer. Traits that weren't mine. Weren't ever mine. I don't know how long I sat like that. Somewhere around dawn, I heard the creak of the floorboards above. Claire was awake. I put the folders back into Bethel's drawer. Locked it. Left no trace. But I didn't go back to bed. Instead, I opened my laptop and typed in the name. J. Armand Paris. Nothing. Then I added a keyword I remembered from the back of the photo, Donor 3317. Still nothing until I remembered something Bethel had once said over dinner. The French use different rules for fertility donors. Much more privacy. But they also keep deeper records, sometimes decades long. So I searched. Fertility Clinic Paris 3317. And I got a hit. A medical paper archived in an obscure European research journal. Co-authored by Dr. Émile Dubois, chief geneticist at the Institut Génétique in Paris. The footnotes listed anonymized donor data used in a case study about targeted phenotypic clustering. Donor 3317. Linked to 6 children born between 2004 and 2008, 3 in France, 2 in the U.S., and 1 labeled simply Northeast Coast. I clicked through another article. Donor 3317, height, 6 feet 2 inches, IQ above 140, background in classical music, polyglot, ancestry traced to old Swiss-French banking family. It was like reading a spec sheet. They had bred him like a designer dog. I closed the browser. Then I opened another tab and searched for private investigators in Boston. I knew what I was about to do was a betrayal. Not just of Claire, but of my daughters. But betrayal already lived in our walls. I needed truth. I needed war. 3 days later, I met him in the back booth of a rundown coffee shop near Fenway. Samuel Keene, former FBI, now private intelligence consultant. Graying, tall, dressed in what looked like a second-hand Brooks Brothers suit. But his eyes, sharp, unblinking, belonged to a man who didn't waste words. "You're not hiring me to track a mistress," he said, flipping through the thin file I compiled. "You're hiring me to dig into a ghost. That's more expensive. I don't care. And if this ghost turns out to be tied to your wife's past? Still don't care." He studied me for a moment, then tapped the photo of Claire and the Paris man. "You're not ready for this," he said. "But you're already in it." And so it began. I gave Keene everything I had. Dates, the fertility clinic name, the lab correspondence, a DNA report I'd taken from Cara's toothbrush and compared to my own using a private genetic sequencing app. Result, no paternal match. It was like handing over my heart in pieces. He didn't flinch. Just folded the file and slipped it into a leather case. "I'll be in touch." The next day, Claire walked into the study while I was staring at the same photo for the 100th time. What are you looking at? She asked casually. I smiled. Old memories. She walked over, saw the photo. She froze. Where did you get this? Your mother's drawer. She was quiet for a long time. Then, that was from Paris. My art history trip. That's Jean-Michel. He was a friend. Donor 3317? Her eyes snapped to mine. I saw it then, just for a moment. A crack in the mask. You've been digging, she said quietly. You lied, I replied just as quietly. Everything I did for us, she whispered. I wanted to scream. But I said nothing. Just nodded. Ethan, she said, her voice breaking now, if you keep pulling at this thread, you won't like what unravels. Too late, I said. And I meant it. It took Samuel Keene 6 days to find him. Not just a name, but a life meticulously hidden, deliberately fragmented across continents. Jean-Michel Armand. Born in Geneva. Educated in London. Trained as a violinist. Fluent in 5 languages. On paper, a quiet philanthropist and art dealer with galleries in Paris, Antwerp, and New York. But behind the polished resume was something else. Donor 3317. He wasn't just a sperm donor. He was chosen, hand-selected, cultivated, and inserted into the lives of women connected to wealth, power, and social pedigree. He was, in Samuel's words, not a man, but a strategy. He didn't just donate, Samuel told me during our second meeting. He seduced. He was embedded. There's a pattern. 6 cities. 12 children. All born to women tied to elite institutions, philanthropic boards, cultural centers. And Claire? I asked, already knowing the answer. She was a project, he said. One of their most successful. There was a name I hadn't expected to hear again, Bethel Whitmore. My mother-in-law. Claire's mother. She hadn't just arranged for the donor. She had known Jean-Michel. Personally. For decades. Samuel traced the first documented link between them to a conference in Geneva in 1998, an international symposium on genetic legacy and cultural continuity. It sounded like a mouthful of academic jargon. But when I read the guest list, it felt like a blueprint for something darker. Among the attendees were geneticists, eugenics historians, reproductive endocrinologists, and several wealthy American socialites, including Bethel Whitmore, listed as a philanthropic sponsor of biocultural integration initiatives. I stared at the screen. The term made my skin crawl. And then the truth hit me. This wasn't about infertility. This was design. Claire hadn't struggled to conceive. The IVF story? A cover. Jean-Michel wasn't a donor. He was assigned. And my family, my children, had been born into a scheme I couldn't even begin to name. Keene uncovered more. A series of encrypted documents pulled from Bethel's cloud archive. She had used a dead lawyer's server in Zurich, probably thinking no one would ever breach it. Inside were donor logs, genetic profiles, contracts, receipts, and files labeled with coded surnames that, when decoded, matched the names of some of Boston's most prominent families, including mine. I saw it all. Kara and Elise had been conceived as part of something called the Bastion Protocol, an unofficial project to create strategic bloodlines across cultural and institutional power centers. The report was clinical. Cold. Subjects placed within elite families via artificial or natural insemination through facilitated connections. Objective, reinforce intergenerational influence through shared genetics, cultural immersion, and ideological grooming. Strategic bloodlines. My daughters were not miracle babies. They were assets. And Claire? She'd known. Maybe not everything, but enough. Enough to let them alter the most intimate part of our lives. I felt like vomiting. Later that night, I stood outside their bedroom door. The twins were inside, talking softly, probably about school, or the upcoming chamber concert, or some boy at the academy. I placed my hand against the wood. Would they ever forgive me if I told them? Or would the lie I never told destroy them more than the truth? And then a terrifying thought, maybe the real damage had already been done. Not by me. Not even by Claire. But by the design itself. The next day, I confronted Claire. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I simply placed the documents in front of her. One by one. At first, she stared at them in silence. Then she whispered, "Where did you get these?" "That's not the question," I said. "Then what is?" "The question," I said, "is why." She looked at me like I was a child. Her expression wasn't regret, it was exhaustion. "You still think we built this life," she said. "Ethan, we were chosen for it." And just like that, it all made sense. The perfect coincidences. The jobs. The connections. The donors. The marriages. We hadn't built a life. We'd been cast in one. When a system is this perfect, you don't dismantle it by exposing it. You dismantle it by infecting it with unpredictability, with truth, with something raw and human. I sat in the old greenhouse at my family's coastal property, a place we never used. It had once belonged to my grandfather, a botanist who preferred orchids to people. Ironic, considering the kind of bloodline he'd supposedly passed down to me. A line that, it turned out, ended with me. Kara and Elise weren't mine. Not biologically. Not genetically. But as I looked through the glass panes at the storm rolling in across the Atlantic, I felt a deep, primal instinct rising from somewhere deeper than DNA. I would protect them, even if I had to destroy everything to do it. Samuel Keene brought more. His last report was a bomb. He'd found records from a clinic in Vienna, one linked to the same genetic pool as Armand. Dozens of children, all fathered through private donor matching programs. All traceable back to a single hidden trust managed by a Luxembourg-based investment firm. And the signatory? Bethel Whitmore. She had funded it. Not just our procedure. All of it. Hundreds of births. Different mothers. Same lineage. A private aristocracy created under the radar of international law. He called it what it was, designer eugenics. They used emotional leverage, Keene said. Told women it was about access to elite donors, intelligence, artistic talent. But it was about control. Legacy. Lineage. The new nobility. And Claire? She was part of it. Maybe not the mastermind, but certainly the disciple. She hadn't just accepted the lie. She'd helped distribute it. I asked Samuel a question I wasn't sure I was ready to hear the answer to. Are there others like Kara and Elise? He nodded. At least 14 confirmed. Across 6 cities. Connected through clinics, schools, scholarships, symphonies. He paused. Most of them don't know. And the fathers? Selected. Then discarded. Some were lied to. Others were paid to disappear. And Jean-Michel? He's more than a donor, Samuel said. He's the carrier. The golden blueprint. They've used him for almost 20 years. He's not hiding anymore, Ethan. He's thriving. I said nothing. The rage sat deep and cold inside me. Not the kind that exploded, but the kind that planned. And so I began writing letters. One to the Federal Bioethics Commission, detailing the network, attaching DNA evidence, Keene's findings, international documentation, and financial trails. One to the families we had quietly identified, those whose children were born of donor 3317 without ever being told. One to a journalist I had once worked with during a foundation grant project, a woman I trusted whose integrity had once gotten her fired for refusing to bury a corruption story. And one to Kara and Elise. A letter I wouldn't give them yet, but would someday, when I had earned the right to be honest. Then I went to see Jean-Michel Armand. He lived in Florence now. A villa tucked into the hills beyond the city. He greeted me with grace, too much of it. Ethan, he said, smiling as if we were old friends. Or should I say, partner in parenthood? I didn't return the smile. You don't get to say that. He gestured to the terrace. Come. We'll drink. Talk. You have questions. I didn't sit. I pulled a manila folder from my coat and dropped it on the marble table. Inside, I said, is the collapse of your entire program. He glanced at it. Amused. You're angry, he said. I stepped closer. No. You know what I am? Finished. Finished? With pretending. With protecting the illusion. With letting you shape my daughter's lives like they were chess pieces. He chuckled softly. But Ethan, don't you see? They are extraordinary. They're the future. They're not your future, I said, my voice low. And they're not your daughters. He leaned back, a flicker of something like irritation breaking through his polished mask. You're just a man who raised them, he said. I'm the one they came from. And yet, I said, leaning in, they call me Dad. I turned and walked away. Left the folder behind. Let him know the storm was coming and he wouldn't be able to charm his way through this one. That night, I returned to Boston. Claire was waiting. She knew. Of course she did. You went to him, she said. Yes. And what now? Now? I said calmly. Now we burn the house down. Figuratively, she asked. But I didn't answer. She poured herself a glass of wine, hands trembling. For the first time, I saw fear in her. Not fear of exposure, but fear of what happens after the truth gets out. She looked at me. Do you think they'll ever forgive us? I didn't respond. Because forgiveness wasn't something either of us had earned yet.